This week, we start talking about the human body in class. You already know tons of things about cells, from their organelles, differences between plants and animals, and how they divide. Well, now we need to talk about the cell hierarchy. As we've discussed with cell theory, every living creature is composed of one or more cells. Now, the really interesting thing is these cells can become specialized and form particular areas of the body, and so we call these tissues. So each tissue will have a different function, and we'll get into the different types of tissues. We then have tissues which make up our organs, so organs like the heart, the lungs, the esophagus, tons of organs. We also have organ systems, and we'll be talking about that later this week. And then together, cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems make up the whole organism. So to define a tissue, not like Kleenex tissue, blow your nose, but tissues in your body, it's a group of specialized cells that have a specific sort of function or task. So every single cell in a body will belong to a specific type of tissue. Animals, like humans, have 4 types of tissues. We have epithelial, muscular, connective, and nervous. Pause the video now. Do you know where any of these tissues are found on the body? Consider the name of the tissue. Where would you find it? So hopefully you paused the video and gave that a bit of a thought. So some things you're going to need to know about tissues are the function of each of these 4 tissues and also examples of where we would find these tissues in the human body. Epithelial tissue is the first type of tissue we're going to talk about. Now, epithelial tissues are the tissues that line all of the surfaces of our body. So external as well as the internal surfaces. So for example, our skin would be an example of epithelial tissue. These tissues are really important because not only do they line the surfaces, thereby protecting these various surfaces, but they also are specialized to help with secretion, so secretion of mucuses or oils or what have you, as well as absorption, so absorption of nutrients or water, depending on where the epithelial tissue is. As you can see from this little monkey down here, it is the tissue that lines our different organ systems. We can organize epithelial tissue by the shape of the cells. So we have cuboidal cells, which are sort of like a cube. We have squamous cells, which are sort of flat little cells. And we also have columnar cells. So those are the sort of tall, skinnier ones. You may also notice the words stratified and simple, and that just basically means simple is where we have one layer of cells, whereas stratified is multiple layers, so there's strata of the cells. The shape of the cell also sort of determines what the function will be, because as I've said before, the structure helps determine function and vice versa. So the first type of cell, which you should be most familiar with, are these stratified squamous cells. When cells are stratified, they tend to take on a more protective barrier. So for example, your skin would have stratified squamous cells. Oh gosh. So there's many different protective layers, protecting you from harmful things exterior to your body. Simple squamous cells, on the other hand, are very thin, which means it's very easy for different nutrients and gases to be exchanged. So that's why you find these cells in the lungs, or lining the lungs. Columnar cells are often found in various tube organs of your body, so bronchi, uterine tubes, trachea, and often they're ciliated, which means they have these little finger-like projections which help to move mucus around, and also sometimes these cells will be secreting mucus. The next tissue we have to talk about is muscular tissue. This is one you should be fairly familiar with. Now, there are actually a few different types of muscular tissue. The first is skeletal muscle. And so skeletal muscle is sort of what you typically associate with muscles. It's your biceps, your deltoids, your gluteus maximus. So it's the muscles that help you move your body. We also have cardiac muscle. Now, cardiac should be a term you've heard before. It means heart. So basically, we have our heart muscle. The heart muscle contracts just like our skeletal muscles, except the difference is it doesn't elicit movement. What it does instead is it, pumps the heart, which of course forces blood around our body. So, very important. Finally, we have smooth muscle. Now, smooth muscles are located in tons of places in the body. We often talk about it in terms of around veins of the circulatory system and around the digestive system. One really interesting thing about smooth muscle is it contracts a little bit differently than skeletal or cardiac muscle, and it's able to perform a type of contraction called peristalsis, which is sort of just contracting in sort of a downward wave, but we'll get into that more later. So you may notice the words, they're not here. Okay, so you may notice that skeletal muscle has these lines, as does cardiac muscle. We say that they're striated, which basically just means you can see lines on them, whereas smooth muscle is non-striated because it doesn't have those lines. The other really interesting thing about smooth muscle is it is innervated by the autonomic nervous system, which means that the body automatically controls the smooth muscle without sort of any conscious thought about it, whereas our skeletal muscle is controlled by our somatic nervous system. The heart is also controlled by the autonomic nervous system. The connective tissue is our next tissue that we're going to talk about. In general, it strengthens, it supports, and protects other tissues. So our connective tissue is made up of cells as well as an extracellular matrix. Now, an extracellular matrix is sort of like a bunch of proteins and other fibrous molecules that link together and create this, matrix that helps to support the cells that are in and around it. This matrix is secreted by the cells around it. We have a few different types of connective tissues you should know about. The first is bone. We also have loose connective tissue and fibrous connective tissue. The main difference is what they're composed of. So here you can see loose connective tissue is composed of elastic fiber, reticular fiber, collagenous fiber, and macrophages, whereas fibrous connective tissue is mostly composed of collagen. As you can see, it's also much more orderly. The loose connective tissues are very flexible and are often found under the skin, whereas fibrous connective tissues are a little bit more rigid and make up things like tendons or ligaments. Cartilage is another type of connective tissue. We also have the blood as an example of a connective tissue, and adipose tissue. Adipose just means fat. The final tissue type that we're going to talk about is nervous tissue. And so nervous tissue is all the neurons in our body. Neurons are the cells that are responsible for sending and receiving signals around our body. There are lots of types of neurons, including multipolar, bipolar, unipolar, pseudo-unipolar, and those are all just names to sort of describe what they look like. But a few examples of neurons in your body would be motor neurons. So those innervate the muscles in your body, and they're the ones that sort of tell the muscles to go. We also have retinal neurons, so those, and olfactory. So retinal is in your retina, and they're receiving that information from the rods and cones in your eye, I believe. And we also have olfactory neurons, which are in your nose, and they have the ability to sort of sense different molecules and stuff like that. And of course, our brain is composed of billions of neurons. So that's basically our four tissues. We have our epithelial tissue, which lines the surfaces in the body to protect, excrete, or absorb. We have our muscle tissues, which contract, whether to create movement, cause the heart to beat, or force something else to move in your body. We have our nervous tissue, which is all of our neurons, which send, receive, and transmit signals throughout the body. And finally, our connective tissue, which is a wide range of what I've always sort of considered a random bunch of different structures. Next time, we're going to talk about how we actually get these specialized cells, but that's our lesson for the day, so good luck!